Hey, I'm Kelly, the shorts programmer at the Toronto Real Asian International Film Festival. Welcome to this Q&A session for the shorts program Artistic Statement. I'm super delighted to be talking with all of our filmmakers and special guests from the films in this program. But before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the participation of the filmmakers and talent was made possible with support from the CBC. During this session, feel free to During this session, feel free to drop your questions for the film questions box just above the chat bar. If you're on your phone, just scroll down below this video and you'll be able to see it there. We are also hosting a live and ongoing conversation happening on our Real Asian Film Forum on the Discord server. Once you log on, we do have a welcome message, and it's our code of conduct. And once you consent, which is just clicking on the green box with the check mark, you'll be able to unlock all of the threads on the server. Finally, Real Asian strives to create a safe and accessible online space for people to gather. Our festival code of conduct can be found on our website at realasian.com/code of conduct. And we encourage you to read it and give it your support. Now, I'm so excited to finally bring up Alexandra Curdo of the film Dancing on My Own. So let's welcome Alexandra to this live stage. Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. It's so great to have you back. First, I have to really give a shout out to your sparkly top. Love it.
I mean, like we were saying backstage, it's true quarantine wear. It's sweatpants on the bottom, sparkles on the top, baby.
Yes, someone quote that right now. I love it. I'm so happy. Ali joined us in 2018 at the festival with her film, her documentary Ulam. So it's like so exciting to have you back, even though it's digital. And I'm really just like so moved to be able to like talk to you about your new film, Dancing on My Own.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, that was actually my first time in Toronto when I came to the Toronto Real Asian Film Festival with Ulam, and it was, blew us away. That experience was so amazing. I mean, to have like 400 plus people waiting outside in the cold to see a movie about Filipino food, I was like, this is beyond my wildest dreams. So it's really great to be back. Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, I really want to kind of get started. I have a bunch of questions that I'm really interested in asking you and talking to you about. But first, I just want to acknowledge like your film, Dancing on My Own, is so much more than just a documentary or a hybrid narrative. Just like how your film is a love letter to bubble tea and queer Asian communal spaces, those spaces are much more than just like a place for creativity, or just like a site of celebration. It's also it's a documentation of community relationships, resiliency, mentorship, care, and brilliance. And so I just wanted to start off with just asking you, why was it important for you to create this film now, and especially when we think about this time where we just can't physically gather in the same way?
I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. I feel like you just gave the thesis for the whole movie. which is amazing. I mean, that's great. Honestly, like, when I made this movie, I had no idea, along with the rest of the world, that COVID-19 would really change the way that we connect as human beings and really limit, I think, in some way, these physical spaces. So for people who don't know or who may not have seen the film yet, Dancing on My Own, like Kelly mentioned, is a love letter to the queer Asian experience. And for me, like a huge part of that has been Bubble Tea, which is this dance party in New York City that is, like Kelly said, so much more than a dance party. It's about home. you know, at the end of the day, it's about home and it's about family. And for me, that was the reason why I needed to make it. It wasn't even just a want, it was a need. You know, I felt a little bit like at the time I was trying to figure out who I was and my identity as an artist, as a filmmaker. And that film was actually the turning point for me to come out in public at the workplace, which is pretty wild. I wasn't out as a queer filmmaker before. You know, I think I was really worried, you know, growing up in a world that I think had really marginalized people like me. And I was worried about identifying and honestly being able to work and being able to kind of be considered the same way. And it's a funny thing when you find your community for the first time. For me, it was the realization that everything that I was taught to fear about myself or to, you know, be worried that people wouldn't understand, all those things that made me different were really the things that made me unique. Like all of my differences were my superpowers, you know, and like that identity, you know, being queer, being Asian, it's like, dang, this is a superpower, you know, like how awesome is this? Like I look around at my community now and I'm like, wow, we are so amazing. We are like so talented, so strong, so fierce. And like,
Yes.
it just feels a little bit like, well, why not? You know, why not celebrate that? And so, you know, when I was making it, it felt really like a celebration of us.
Thank you for, wow, that was, I'm just like, oh, that was so amazing. And actually that really does kind of lead into the next thing I wanted to ask you. I know as much as it is this like collective kind of celebration and of just like, it's not like, yes, it is, let's be proud and happy. And there's like so many moments that we can kind of cherish and it's very tender. But at the same time, there's also this shared kind of, you know, kind of everyone's own journey to this point. And I think that's what's so important about this film is that it holds that in such a caring way, but also it is this really positive film. And I think what moves me every time I watch the film is just that realization, even for yourself, when you realize that you do, like when you weren't capable, like at a point where you could see a future for yourself. I think that piece, and then just hearing everyone kind of also sharing their experience and like, you know, just I don't know, it was just like, it's such a touching and open kind of conversation that every time I watch
Thank you. I know it's like it's a little bit of like a laughing and a crying kind of film, you know. Like, you know, and that was sort of the goal, is to really like take you through the full range of emotions, you know. Like coming out is something that is different for everyone, and I think for a lot of people it's really tough because you kind of have to choose, or you feel, I think you have to choose between you know, being queer, being Asian, being one thing, being another. And for me, it was a process of realizing that identity is so multifaceted, and it's, you know, it can encompass all these things. You know, you can actually be all these things and they don't have to be in conflict with each other. And for me to kind of watch this film now after, you know, the whole world, you know, it seems like has fallen apart. I mean, it's so cool because it's a reminder, I think, of like everything we've built, you know, everything we've done, everything we've accomplished. And that's made me realize, wow, if we've already gotten this far, you know, the future is only bright for us, you know. And I look at like the newer generation, I look at the young kids on TikTok, you know, and I'm just like so inspired because, you know, I realize that it's like, wow, I grew up in this time where, you know, we didn't really embrace as a society things like fluidity, you know, identities like being genderqueer, you know. And I feel like in the future, maybe that we'll actually all understand that all of this is a spectrum anyways, and all of it can be really whatever we want to be.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I think also kind of brings me back to like how the film is just such a healing process, like not just I know for on your end, but just like I think for many folks who watch the film, who are part of the film. So I am just kind of curious because I know talking to you before and like just reading on some of your interviews, I guess like your own personal narrative wasn't part of this film from the start. It was something that you came to.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Initially I wanted to make a documentary just solely focused on bubble tea, which is, the queer Asian community and dance party and the scene. But then as I was making it, I realized that, I was also a part of the story. And the entire film was actually part of this grant program called the Visco Voices Grant Program. And it was actually one of my advisors who challenged me and who said, you're part of the story. Bubble tea has changed your life. So why not tell that part of the story? So yeah, I'm in it. My mom's in it.
Yes.
It's a real family affair. And I think that is really the most fun part is, showing kind of the family aspect of being queer. I think that that it's actually a huge part of that experience, and it hasn't really been explored yet. So I'm really happy to kind of bring you into my queer family and my chosen family.
Yeah, I think actually we had a Q&A with another filmmaker earlier this week, and something they said about, okay, it's not about integrate, like the characters here aren't like looking to integrate into whatever the society is, but rather it's about them trying to find belonging within their own family. And I thought that was so touching, and that kind of also reminded me a bit about your film. And yeah, I just thank you so much for being here. I think we are kind of at the end of our section. I'm like, how are we?
No, I know we could chat for another hour, but yeah, thank you again so much for having me. And I hope for everybody who watched the film, I hope you enjoy it. I hope you take something sweet from it and realize that, we're all just here to be loved.
Mm-hmm. And for folks watching, you still have time to watch the film if you haven't yet. And also we'll be continuing the conversation in Discord later. So feel free to hop on and ask the questions there. Thank you.
Yes. I think the one last thing I would want to say is if anyone wants any more information on bubble tea or, the film and the community, totally reach out. I'm on Instagram at Alexandra Cuerdo. It's just my name. And also bubble tea's on Instagram as well. And it's bubble 4_T. And you'll notice it's the Instagram with all the sparkly photos.
Love it. All right. Bye, Ellie.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Okay, so next up we have Akira Boch and Tadashi Nakamura of Atomic Cafe, the noisiest corner in J-Town. I'm so happy to have you both here with us and the Real Asian Crowd.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Definitely happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for including our film.
We're just as delighted. I have to say, like, this is such a cool and exciting film. I think I shared this with you both before, but as someone who like grew up really loving punk rock, I always like felt it was such a white space. So like, I think seeing this film and knowing that like Atomic Cafe existed and actually still exists in our memories, it was just like, so such a cool part of that history that I didn't realize existed. So thank you. I think on that, I do want to ask, like, how did you both come to sharing the story of Atomic Cafe? And like, did you grow up knowing Atomic Nancy, or like, how did you come to this film?
Tad, you want to take that?
Yeah, I think both of us can kind of talk about what we knew about Atomic Cafe before we worked on this project, because I think both Atomic Nancy and the cafe were really well known within the community. I heard about it from my parents. Heard about Atomic Nancy from my parents as well. But this specific project was started by the Little Tokyo Service Center, which they do a whole bunch of things. It's a nonprofit community organization, and they do a lot of things within Little Tokyo. And one of the things they do is try to. They've been for the last several years been really trying to combat the gentrification of Little Tokyo. And so the actual building that Atomic Cafe used to be in was actually going to be demolished for a metro station. And so literally, the building was going to be demolished, and they wanted to make sure that at least the history wasn't going to be demolished as well. At that time, the Atomic Fat Cafe was getting some media attention from more mainstream outlets in LA, but they were really actually gentrifying that story itself too, really focusing on kind of the white participants, the white celebrities, the punk aspect, and not including kind of the Japanese American roots, the Little Tokyo roots of the story, and Nancy's family. So Little Tokyo Service Center kind of asked me and Akira to work on the project, and that's how we got to this point.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, Akira.
Oh, so I moved to LA first in 1989, which is actually when the Atomic closed, and I had no idea that it even existed for many years, even though I used to go to this other spot called the Troy Cafe, which was like 2 doors down, which opened in the 90s. And it was a huge gathering spot, mainly for Chicano artists and musicians. But it was kind of an outgrowth of the whole Atomic Cafe movement. And I had, over the years, I had heard of Atomic Nancy. She's this sort of mythical figure in the LA Little Tokyo community because she has an amazing voice. She was the original singer of the band Hiroshima, and Hiroshima is probably considered, Tad, wouldn't you say, the most famous Japanese American band that has ever existed, right?
Yeah, they're the only JAs I've ever seen on Soul Train.
That's high status.
Yeah.
And so her reputation preceded her. And so I had heard about her, and I was really excited to meet her the first time that we shot an interview with her at the Atomic Cafe before it was demolished. So, and also, growing up, I was also into punk music. And I didn't really fully realize or think that it was really a white space. And if you look at the photos that we included, of the punk scene, it's actually very diverse. There's Asian Americans, there's Chicanos involved. LA, the LA punk scene was pretty diverse in that respect. So anyhow, that's how I came to this project. That was my background on it.
Yeah, actually, I think what both of you brought up kind of leads on to the other part. What I was interested about the film is this concept of how do we remember spaces that no longer exist, and how is film a way to do that? And I think that was really interesting, trying to remember the space but not having any I guess focus on Nancy and her family and their kind of relationship to the space. And I thought that was what was really moving about the film. And I think I understand the film also as this collective kind of memory piece where we have all these other folks who have a relationship to the space. And even with the space not here, it's this kind of ongoing, I guess, I don't know how to word it, but I suppose an ongoing, and the film itself is so embodied in this ongoing way of just everyone can still impart their memory to it. And so I think on that, was there anything as you were working on this film, any kind of new questions or new and surprising aspects of this history that you may not have known prior, that you maybe came across while doing more research or doing the interviews with the folks who had a connection to the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like you said, right, it's this collective memory, and especially it's kind of an after-hour spot, or it was both a working hour spot and an after-hour spot. So it really meant different things to different people, especially generationally, right? Because there's Nancy's kind of parents' generation, and then kind of Nancy's generation, which is is a whole generation younger. So it was interesting. I mean, there was things we didn't really include, but there was Yakuza hanging out not only at the punk scene, and then also too just kind of local kids to be exposed to all that. So yeah, I think there was a bunch of little things that I didn't know about because all I had known about was basically it was just a lot of Little Tokyo folks or kind of kids coming coming to eat after a concert and stuff like that. So I didn't really know the diversity of the clientele there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it was at a perfect intersection, really. It's at the eastern end of Little Tokyo, right, which basically borders with Boyle Heights, East LA. So you had a lot of, young Chicano kids coming from that side of town. You had the local JAs. You had the predominantly white, pop stars coming in. And then you had the whole punk scene. So it was just this incredible mix of, of all these people who really, Nancy calls them misfits, right? They're the people, they're the outcasts who didn't have another place to hang out. So Nancy was the one that provided that space for them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think something else that kind of came up, I was curious, like, how did you, was it easy to find photos of the space, or like just, or I'm just thinking of like other kind of living documents to kind of like, because your film, as you mentioned, like shows us like these photos of, that of the space at that time. And I don't know, it's just like, it's so cool. It's like, wow, how did these photos exist at, I don't know, like, I was just curious also, was there a lot of that documentation? Was it easy to come across that documentation?
Well, luckily, Zen, who's in the film, Atomic Nancy's daughter, she's a professional photographer. So I think just in terms of like understanding, high resolution, understanding kind of archival. So to her, this is all part of her family history. So once we started working on the project, once we contacted the family, a lot of the stills we got were through them, not necessarily from their family collection, but through the family that they have gotten from other people, as well as, it was to a certain extent high profile. I think they did a profile in Rolling Stone back in the day about the cafe. So there were, a good amount of quote unquote professional photographs of the space.
Yeah, it was one of those spaces that drew in a lot of photographers, and over the course of editing is when we started to find out that different photographers had gone there and done some documenting, and then even once it was done, I was talking about the film, and this guy that I know told me that he had gone there and shot the Go-Go's there. Which I, would have never known if I hadn't made this film and been talking about it. So I'm sure there's probably a lot more stuff out there too that we just haven't come across.
Yeah, I think where I was trying to go with that too is like this being such an iconic space, but thinking about like who is behind that documentation process. So I think that's what's so special about this film as well. And I think both of you coming from like being connected to the community and like kind of like a reformatting of the narrative of the space, and one that does include Nancy and her family's story. I think that was like such an important piece that seems like it wasn't told before, or at least shared in this way. So yeah, I think thank you so much for both like being so generous and kind of sharing your experience to it. I think on that, I just wanted to add, I know with like the ongoing even here in Toronto, like gentrification is just such an ongoing like process, and thinking about, the Chinatowns here and, the collectives that have really like of like artists and activists and community organizers who have like kind of like come together to really be at the forefront for advocacy kind of work. I'm kind of curious with this film and just thinking about what's also happening in LA J-Town, what kind of, I guess, responses are or active responses to gentrification is happening right now that you can maybe share, that maybe we can learn more and support, or yeah.
I mean, we're really lucky in, unlike a lot of communities, in Little Tokyo, we have a really strong built-in infrastructure with organizations, whether, big organizations or small nonprofits. So for a while now, a lot of people have been putting a lot of time and effort into, trying to hold as much control, community control of the area as possible. But at the same time, we can only do so much. And so it's really been about, offering kind of information and education to the new residents, to the new store owners, and hoping that they really kind of understand the history that they're now participating in, and to not only respect that, but to help preserve that.
And continue to move it forward, right, within the Japanese American culture specifically, right? And there is it's called the Little Tokyo Community Council. It gathers together all these different organizations and business owners on a monthly basis, and that's where they get together and organize. So I think they've been pretty effective.
Yeah,
That's
but
awesome.
It is.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying. I mean, there's so many stories like the Atomic in Little Tokyo, and then it's always that store. For me, it's like the camera store that you just took for granted, that you never thought would go away, and now it's like a sneaker boutique, and all of a sudden, that history is gone. So I think, there's tons of stories of specifically businesses in Little Tokyo that don't exist, but that had a huge role in kind of shaping the community.
But Tad is actually very excited that it's a sneaker boutique.
It's okay. We are all complex people who can be happy for that, but also sad. So I think that's like a great way to kind of, unfortunately, close this segment of this conversation. But for folks tuning in, you can still watch the film. If you haven't yet, I highly recommend it. And as I've been mentioning throughout, I'll be saying much more later. Join the Discord. Hopefully we'll be also able to chat more there. So thank you, Tad and Akira.
All right, thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Bye. Oh, Tad's still here. Hey, okay. I'm really happy. I'm now joined by Steffi and Maya of the film Margot. So welcome, both of you. I know you're both, I think, in Toronto. So it's really great to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So on that, your film, it's such an important and necessary story that really shows the ways that misogyny and sexism and harassment manifest in workspaces, and specifically here in the film and TV industry. I think it's really critical to remember that creative spaces aren't always safer ones. And so I guess I want to just start off with Steffi, how did you start? Like, how did you come to telling this story? And Maya, like, what brought you to be part of this film as well? Like, what drew you in?
I think a couple of years had passed after post-grad, that awkward stage, which is usually like the year right after you graduate, and the other year where you're like figuring out how to get a job, what kind of job that you like. So enough time had passed, and I talking to like people who I'd went to school with and just hearing their experiences. So that kind of just helped naturally in, I think, influencing me and making the story. And I think I wrote it down because it did affect me in actually like putting it down on paper and making it one piece. Was there's that short story called Cat Story in the New Yorker, and it was just, Maya, do you know what I'm talking about? This story? Yeah. And it went viral, and all it really was about a woman in her undergrad who went out on a date. And I read the whole thing, and it seemed pretty normal. But the fact that it went viral because people just, I guess, weren't used to hearing women talk about their stories. I thought the story was banal, but it also made me realize, like, it's not banal, it's just a lot of women don't tell their stories. Yeah, and that's what influenced me in creating the film and writing the story in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I think that's what's also interesting about the film, right? It's kind of like, Margot on set, like her day at work, her time at home. There's I mean, there is a pretty like, I guess like in comparison, like a significantly like kind of like larger moment at in this one particular scene, but like throughout the film, it's all these like little moments where I think what's interesting is like, I mean, for myself, it's like, okay, I clearly read it in this way, but maybe for Margot at the moment, is this something that she, you know, she may be questioning, like, is this, should this be a concern for me, or am I valid to feel, I guess, like justified to like think of this as something else? But I think before I kind of go off on a weird tangent, Maya, like, how did you come to this film, and like, how did you become a part of it? And being the lead, sorry, did I say that? Maya is the lead of the film. She plays Margot. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what drew you? Did you know Steffi before this film? And I think part of it, like, being such a, it is a heavier topic. So what were some of the ways that you both like kind of, I guess, considered like care practices as part of, you know, the making of this film?
Honestly, what you were just about to say at the end there about how it's kind of portrayed in this way where you're never really sure, or you're kind of wondering, like, is this okay? Is this not okay? Is kind of what drew me to it in the first place. Because I remember I just saw a description I was in university at the time, and I just saw a description on like a casting page saying like film called Margot, and the description was just like Margot, a production assistant, has a day on set, or something really simple like that. I'm paraphrasing. I can't remember exactly what it was. And I remember being intrigued because I was like, oh, I think that's an interesting way to describe like what happens in a film. And then of course it does depict this thing that is, as Steffi's saying, so common to women's experiences in this industry and other industries, of course. But it's done in this way which is probably a bit, in some ways, authentic to the way it's actually experienced, which is there's no sign coming up that's saying this is harassment or this is not okay. You're just like in there, it's just you and the person, and you're like, it's human relationships, and you're like, that made me feel really bad or uncomfortable, but there's no one saying, hey, that's not okay, or step back or something like that. So I think I appreciated how Steffi depicted it, and yeah, I found that intriguing.
Yeah, I think that's definitely like what you answered. Like that was also what like really struck me about the film. And I think another aspect of it too is like, you know, Margot's relationship with her mom, and it's this other layer in which we kind of see Margot kind of navigate, you know, being expected to do something or be presented in a certain way. And, you know, it's kind of like layered and complicated, packaged with like care and like good intention, but then also, you know, like, I guess, I don't know what's the right word, because I'm just, it's such a complicated kind of feeling that I had when I was watching it. So I guess I was curious about kind of what both of your thoughts were about like Margot's relationship with her mom, and like what you really want to convey from that relationship.
At one point, yeah, sure, I'll start. At one point, just in a joking way, it was titled Margot versus the World, and it was like just Margot not having a really peaceful place to be in. Like, yes, her mother does care about her. It's just the way she goes about it is so tense and rigid, and also just not as commonly depicted. I feel like I always see a lot of perfect mothers, or just even in social media, like people are always like, I love my mom, she's perfect, and I wanted to see a different portrayal of how a daughter sees their mom. Yeah. Maya.
I think it was important that she loves her mom, but she like she doesn't know how, because I think it's too easy to just be like, oh, like F you, mom, if you're not like, you know, letting me do what I want. But that's in a way like too easy. And I think that's not how a lot of families are. Like, you still love your parents, but it's really complicated.
Yeah.
Right. So I think
yeah, and I think that's what was so also compelling about that part, because it was like, okay, I can definitely relate to Margot's feelings right now, but then also yeah, just all those moments where like, okay, I know this is well intentioned, but also like I think I'm just not going to
Scary.
say anything.
It's scary. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But also, Mom, if you're listening, I do love you.
Yeah. Same.
Okay, I don't know how the time flew by, but I think that's kind of our section together. But I've been mentioning at every point, like the conversation doesn't end here. This is kind of the starting point. So we do have a Discord channel where we've just been chatting with filmmakers and extending the conversation there. So please, folks, still leave your questions. I'll be able to still share with the filmmakers after this Q&A. So thank you so much, Maya and Steffi, for joining in.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I really don't like saying bye at this point. Hey, hi, I'm so happy
Hi.
to. Yeah, I feel like I'm saying like hi, bye. Like I never know where I am in the conversation now, but I'm really delighted to have both Shirley and Kat join in. They're also tuning in from Toronto, so really happy that you're both here.
Well, thank you so much for having us. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm sorry that we can't do this in person.
It's okay. There will be a time in the future. I know it. I can see it. So I just wanted to start. So for all of our audience members, if you, weren't familiar with this yet, Shirley is actually a poet, and this film, Novena, is her first film, and it's an animated film at that. So I think what was so interesting is this concept of thinking about an artist, really trying this new and different medium. And so I was just kind of curious, Shirley, what brought you to film, and what was your process to kind of create this adaptation of your poem? And I know I'm so conscious of the time we have together. I also want to ask, how did you know you wanted this specific poem? And just wanted to also point out that Novena is part of Shirley's second book of poems called Mercy. So make sure to also check out the book.
Thanks. Well, I mean, it's a big question. When it was the context of COVID that I was thinking of trying to do something more than write a book. So I was stuck trying to write my next one. And of course, everybody's isolated in quarantine and really needing a sense of community. And in this time in the world, there was so much going on, not just COVID, there were so many protests, riots. And I think there was a collective grief that was happening in the world. And that's something that Kat and I had discussed. And that was basically the context for really wanting community and to be creative and to do something that I felt was a little bit more than just stewing at home, complaining about not being able to go out, complaining that life wasn't as it was because of what was going on. So this was an ode to, I think, the collective grief. And it stems from the book that I wrote as an elegy to my mother, who had died a few years ago. And it really resonated at the time. And why I chose this specific poem was because it had so many different elements to it that I could incorporate so many people that are in my life that I always wanted to work with and never figured out how to do that, such as Kat, into creating this poem/film. And so, I mean, Kat can speak more about her process with that, but this was a great way for me to be able to have that sense of community in a way that a lot of people unfortunately don't have when they're home in isolation. So that's basically the crux of what led me to creating this. And it opened the door artistically for me to be able to do something more than just write in a silo as a poet, very, very solitary. So it gave me a great sense of being able to work with people, even if I am staring at a screen.
Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of leads to the next thing I wanted to share about what was really stood out about the film is, yes, you are watching the screen, but it's such an embodied film. I know it's only 2 minutes, but just the sensory experience of the film, but also knowing that the creation of the film was a collaboration of so many amazing Filipino, creatives from the city. And this kind of segues into, Kat, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. For all of our audiences, Kat was the music composer, or is the music composer, sorry, of Novena. And I'm just kind of curious, Kat, like, can you share like what your process was working on the soundscape for this film? And kind of how did you go about it with like the poem already kind of in its own right as a finished piece? Where did you begin, and can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, as Shirley mentioned earlier, this is a project that was born out of COVID. So I think the themes of grieving the loss of our normal was definitely kind of an influence in the creation of at least for my part of this work. And this whole idea of creating from an embodied place was actually very central to the work that I did, because I wanted to create from a place of following my intuition. When we started talking, me and Shirley kind of got together even before the animation was created. So what happened was we had a check-in, and then I asked Shirley if she could kind of send me a voice recording of how she would pace herself when she reads the poetry. So that kind of cadence gave me um, the direction of where to place things. And um, I think when I was incorporating the sounds, I wanted specifically to work with kulintang, which is a Filipino indigenous instrument that is very central to my work as a musician. Um, and I think this whole connection of loss and your identity and family, I think, could be conveyed in connecting with music with a physical thing as a gong instrument. So um, I think that the sound also of kulintang, uh, it's not quite tuned to Western instruments. So there is a discomfort in hearing the sounds of the gongs, and then I also incorporated some atmospheric sounds that kind of don't um, kind of work well theoretically together. So I think the intention of creating a piece um, that's really uncomfortable for me, but at the same time feels like it makes sense, because that's what the film and the piece, the poetry piece, was about. So I wanted to kind of stay true to that in the process.
Yeah, I think there's just like so much, so many different like entry points into this film, and I'm kind of curious. I think something also you brought up, Kat. I know maybe you didn't mean it in the same sense, but this checking in as well. And I was just thinking about, like thinking about how COVID has been quite an isolating experience for many folks. Just thinking about like coming together and this being able to still create and have these conversations and these check-ins. I feel like the process of creating the film itself it seems very like a healing process as well. And I'm wondering, maybe for you, Shirley, like how has your relationship to this poem now changed? And maybe Kat, even for yourself now with seeing the film finished, how has your relationship maybe shifted to it, maybe, or not?
I mean, I never, when I write, I'll speak for myself only, you want to lift words off of a page, and you kind of want to make, you want to form images. You want somebody to have that actual sense of real understanding of your work. So seeing this all come together, and then there's so many different elements to it. I was grieving at the time. This poem really takes place. It's the first night of my mother's death. And so a novena is essentially the 9 days straight of prayer. That's it's a ritual in Filipino Catholic traditions to sort of send somebody off who's just died. And feeling really alone and writing it and hearing all of these voices around me during that first night, I really wanted to convey that sense of being really alone, but there was so much going on externally that I couldn't quite process because so much was going on inside. So to see it all actually come together and to have the people, I mean, I got my aunts who were leading the prayers to take part in this poem, Kat with, the kulintang. That was to me something so special to be able to really honor my mother in that way. And like Kat said, it's a form of healing for me, but also to be able to share it with so many other people and have other people relate to it in that way. That to me was the ultimate reward, just being able to share it and then engender those conversations, engender hopefully other people's comfort in seeing this and being able to relate and understand and say, I get this, I'm feeling this, thank you so much. So that to me was really quite, I'm so glad I made the film for that reason. And it's really changed the way I look at the work now.
Thank you. Kat, I don't know if you want to add anything to that or anything you wanted to share.
Yeah. I just wanted to say thank you to Shirley for kind of spearheading this project, because I think if it weren't for this project, I didn't have like an external kind of means for me to be accountable to myself, because days would kind of bleed into days and I don't know what we're doing anymore. And I think this project has kind of served this kind of purpose that I want to do something, and it's really fulfilling to create something and to now be able to share it with everybody. It's also kind of a joy in itself. So I really thank you, Shirley, and also to Real Asian for
Thanks so
having
much, Kat.
Well, I think that kind of naturally led us to the end of our time together here for now. So folks tuning in, please check out this film if you haven't watched it yet. It's really just watch it. I think this conversation just is this beginning to think again, to really, it's just a beginning conversation about all of many things that we can continue to talk about. So thank you both for sharing your time, being so generous to be here with us. I hope you both stay safe, and we're going to be in touch soon.
Thanks so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. Next up, we have the amazing Tanya Hoshi of Father Figure. So I'd like to welcome her on stage. Thank you so. Hey, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I think I'm just gonna dive right into it. So Tanya's film, it's a documentary about the elder Pakistani Canadian artist Wahab Jafar. And I think for me, what was so important is, again, just seeing such, when we think about art and think about, artists or whatnot, I think your piece is a love letter to, the Pakistani artists in our community. And, Wahab is also based in Toronto. And I think that was such an important story for us to include here. I think on that, I'm kind of curious, how did you meet him? And how did you get him to be part or to share his story?
Sure, I'm happy to tell that. So this film was originally commissioned by the Rangoonwala Foundation. It's a not-for-profit based in UK. And one of their missions is to support artists. So they were creating a gallery in the UK that was going to feature all of Wahab's works from the beginning all the way till the end, because he's a retired artist. They wanted to do something to commemorate that and to, celebrate him. So they wanted to create a video for it, and they were looking for someone ideally who was also Pakistani and ideally also based in Toronto so they can go and film him in person. And luckily I was recommended, which for me, I'm so happy I was. And I think that came just because I had an online presence. So I always tell filmmakers, please have an online presence. I have no relationship with Wahab or the Rangoon Walla Foundation, but since they typed in Pakistani, Canadian, probably on Google, they found me. And I'm so happy they reached out. And yeah, filming with him was incredible. I told him, hey, I'm going to come over and we're going to make a film happen. And no one's ever said that to him. So he was very, very, very happy. I mean, I could tell the whole time, like, he was just so happy to have me there. It meant a lot to him to have someone just listen to his story. And the only thing that was planned for this film was an interview. I had my questions planned in advance. Otherwise, you know, he showed me around. A lot of the things you see in the film just happened on the day. I did not expect going there to hear him talk about his friends and then passing away. So it became much more than just a story about his art. It was like a story about him as a human being, about his friends. And the big takeaway really for me was that you live on in your art even after you pass away. And I thought that was so beautiful. And that touched me incredibly while I was there filming it with him.
Yeah, actually, you just kind of led to the next point. Like for me, that was what really drew me in, was that, you know, the film is about him, but it's not, as you mentioned, it's about his friends. It's about the community that he was part of. The way he talked about the art, like I just loved how he was like, just, you know, when you're picking a piece of work, this is something, you know, it's not just putting on your wall. This is something you're living with. This, and it was just thinking about art in such an embodied way, and like not just thinking of this like, I guess, just like an object that you have hanging somewhere or being part of the space. I think about that. I'm curious to hear more about you and your filmmaking practice, just because, you know, Tanya, for all those who aren't familiar with this, Tanya is a very seasoned producer and has been at the Real Asian Film Festival multiple times, but this is your first time joining us as the director. So just wanted to hear a bit more about you and your filmmaking, how you resonated with that, I guess, what Wahab was sharing and what you like took away from hearing his stories.
I think, like, even with Wahab, I think we both agree that in order to, you know, become good at creating art, you have to consume good art. And that's kind of what he was really emphasizing as a collector of art. He would collect so much. Eventually, after a while, he was like, I know what I like. I know what I think is good. I want to create it too. So he had this nice balance of consuming art, but then also then creating it alongside. It's almost like, you know, you borrow ideas because of the artists that you respect. You go interact with those artists, you know, you meet them, you learn from them. So in the same way I do that with my films, you know, I don't just create films. For me, it's the whole aspect of filmmaking is storytelling. That's really all it is. So you have to master the craft of storytelling by then viewing other storytellers, view other stories, and look at the stories that move you deeply, that resonate with you. And then that's going to be the ones that you're going to get really good at telling yourself. So that's really what I do. I start with the story. You know, a story that's going to move me is most likely going to move others that I'm going to create this film for. Not necessarily everyone, but, you know, you create a film for a specific demographic, for a specific audience, and you need to have them in your mind before you start. And that's what I do. And if I don't have a strong grasp on that, then I can't begin. And that's my big thing.
Wow.
Everything else. Yeah, I was going to say everything else just falls into place after that.
Well, I was just going to say, I think another really big piece of the film is this idea of like, not idea, but like, you know, mentorship, thinking about the importance of that, especially in creative spaces, and just thinking about film. And even this conversation, I'm like, whoa, everyone, Tanya's dropping all these tips and these motivational kind of like quotes. So I do want to end our time together here with you, sharing about maybe was there any words of wisdom during your time with Wahab that he imparted on you, and maybe like likewise what you might want to share with our audiences.
I think the key thing with him is like, create art because you absolutely love it, you know, not for any other reason. So be involved in it just because it's your passion, it's what you love. And then everything else will kind of fall into place. So not to stress about things that you don't have control over. So being there with Wahab, I realized that, you know, there's this like aura of peaceness to him. Is that even a word? But just he's just very peaceful. He's at peace. He accepts kind of like where he is now in life. He's retired, but he still continues to paint. He's still inspired to paint just because he looks back in life of all the artists that he's been involved with and the arts he's collected. It inspires him to continue creating. So for me, that's kind of the same thing. What inspires me to create films is, watching other filmmakers and the things they create, the stories they tell. It makes me want to do the same as well. And that's really it. That's like my best advice, at least I guess at the higher level, that what I've learned from him is just do it because you love it. And that's going to kind of push you to get through all the hurdles that come your way.
Wow. Thank you so much. I feel like I just left with this reinvigorated kind of feeling of yes, I can maybe even make it through this Q&A. So.
You're doing a great job. You're doing a really good job, Kelly.
On that note, thank you so much, Tanya. And for those who are tuning in, please, we're still welcoming questions, and you can definitely drop them in the little box above the chat bar. Also, we are very present on Discord, and Tanya is on there, so we can definitely chat about her film there too. So thank you so much, Tanya.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Jamie. And thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
And now I'm so happy to introduce you all to Yiru Chen of the film Handscape. And Yiru is joining us from New York. So thank you so much. So for all you folks who have seen the film or have yet to see the film, your film is such a poetic and meaningful film. I know for us as a festival this year, we were thinking a lot about accessibility, and for us it was so important to see this narrative film that is completely or mostly told in Chinese Sign Language, which is, I think, something for me that was very rare to see.
Mm-hmm.
So I think on that, I'm curious to know, how did you come to telling this story? And also want to make a note to all our audiences, whoever watched the film, the leads are actors who are either deaf or hard of hearing. So I'm just curious, can you just tell us more about the filmmaking process as well?
Of course. So this is my thesis film for my film school. I attend NYU School of the Arts. And during my years, I came across American Sign Language, and I minored the American Sign Language. That how do I put it? It just makes me feel that I finally found the thing that really connects with my passion and the root. But I also at the time, I also was going through some identity myself as well, because you're in a foreign environment dealing with your own culture and your own values. And that's the time that I figured that I want to go back to my hometown, which is Shanghai, to really engage with the deaf and hard of hearing communities there, to learn Chinese Sign Language again, to fulfill a dream from my childhood. So that was the initial seeds why I want to make this film in Shanghai and in Shanghai Sign Language. I want to re-explore who I am as a person, and wanna tell the story of dream, of freedom, of exploration through sign language. And I think that deaf people and hard of hearing people are the native speakers of the language, and I think it is just right to cast them in my film and not just using hearing people as actors. So in the process, I considered it as a serendipity even to just really find the talented actor who is not a professional actor, but we work together and we give the story structure real flesh and blood. So if let's say my initial ideas and the willing is like the fish bones, like the real interactions with the actors, really give the story and give the whole film its flesh and blood.
Wow, thank you. Even your answers are very poetic. And I just wanted to say, we had this previous conversation, and I really hope that you, like, I really took a lot when we spoke about the different considerations that you had to take while being on set. And I thought, would you mind like actually sharing that a bit more, just because it's totally different from, you know, what might typically happen.
So I have to say, when I was first back in Shanghai, my Chinese sign language is not as good as my American sign language, which is, to myself, I found it really weird. I think it's really, really weird. But I figured that I need a sign language interpreter on my set. So throughout my rehearsal process and even during the production of the film, I do hire professional sign language interpreters there, and we teach everyone in my set some simple sign languages to communicate with our protagonists, both the boy and the mother. And it's just also for my crew members, it's a very fascinating experiences for them to learn how to use these basic signings to communicate. And well, during the production, it must be very intense, and sometimes all the atmosphere is very struggling a lot of times. But the fact that you have to use sign language with the actors, with the people on set, means that you have to tap on their shoulders, and that gives you a moment of pause to not lash out to other people, to just hold your emotions back. Because I know if on set, if you panic or you are very angry, that will ruin the energy of the set. So that you take that moment to stop and to tend to the other person, that gives you the time to rethink what you want to direct and to give it space for communication. So I think that's the most important takeaway from the set, and with working with deaf and hard of hearing actors and sign language interpreters.
Yeah, I think there's like so much like learning process as well, and just like again thinking about the ableism that exists in our kind of, and is assumed in our everyday kind of lives and the ways that we go about to do things. I think on that too, just kind of one of the final things that I want to ask you about, throughout the film, I was so struck by the ways that you were quite restrained in how you told us or left clues about what we could know to identify the characters. I think that's so important, because it was a moment, even for myself, where, okay, for example, like our main character, when we see that his nails are painted red, like what does that mean? What does that signify to me? And it's never quite clear how he identifies or whatnot. But I just wanted to know a bit more about what your thought process was, and how you really, again, carefully were so intentional with crafting your characters.
I think a key word that I want to point out here is fluidity. I think identity, especially self-identity, should be fluid, and I think it applies to everyone. Specifically talking about my film, there's a scene toward the very, very end that we filmed at my grandmother's house, that they have a little, not like garden, but they're like full walls, like all these up, and the only open space is beyond their head is the sky. So it's sort of like a metaphor that I want my characters to be. And also, like, within all these walls, the characters themselves want to reach out their hands and arms to try to touch the freedom, in a sense. So I think so I think that process of trying, the process of willing to reach out your hand and your arm, regardless what strains and what barriers and what borders around you, just to try. I think that the initial, also the most important thing I put in my characters, and I think I put a part of myself into the film as well, because leaving the film school also leaves me a vacancy that I also wonder, so what's next? I don't know if I'm able to make for future films, but it's because of making that film that opens the door for me to know deaf education, to know that there's another field that I can actually be working in and to benefit more children with hearing disabilities. So I think it's also the process and unlimited willing to try to fight for the freedom that you want.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, Yiru. I think there's so much to think about from what you just shared with us here. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our time together, and I know you have to go off to study for your, or prepare for your work. So thank you so much again for being here today. And yeah, I really hope that our audiences can take so much more from your film now after hearing you speak.
Yes, and I want to give special thanks to Jamie and really appreciate every sign language interpreters all around the world. And I think you guys are really doing an amazing job to make the accessibility happen. Thank you. And thank you, Kelly, for this amazing interview.
Thank you. Bye, Yiru.
Bye.
And I guess on that, I know our guests came in and out, and I had to say bye so many times. But I'd love to thank everyone, all of our lovely guests who were able to join us for this Q&A session today. If you're looking to continue the conversation, please go and check out our Real Asian Film Forum on the Discord. I'd like to thank Jamie, our amazing ASL interpreter, Mimi and Joe on the back end, and Chris, our lovely staff mod, and of course, everyone here attending this session. Real Asian is still running, and we're on until November 19th. So there's still a lot of time to catch films, panels, and take part in all the discussions, whether live or recorded. So please check out realasian.com for more information. But for now, take care and stay safe.